Bom dia a todos. Acho que podemos dar início à sessão de abertura deste workshop. Eu gostaria de convidar para compor a mesa o professor Marcelo Morales, diretor do CNPq, a professora Zara Turci, representando o CONFAP, o professor Antônio Saraiva, e o professor Fábio Larondola. Infelizmente, o professor Nunes está preso num congestionamento de trânsito. Ele calcula que vai chegar daqui a uns 15 minutos, mas ele pediu para nós irmos adiantando essa cerimônia de abertura. Depois ele vai estar aqui conosco para conversar e discutir. Então, acho que antes de mais nada, passaria a palavra para você, Marcelo.
Obrigado, Carlos. Primeiro, eu gostaria de dar bom dia a todos, cumprimentar todos aqui, os coordenadores da mesa, os presentes aqui nessa mesa, todos os participantes. Queria cumprimentar o Fábio Della Rotonda, que é representante do Ministério da Ciência e Tecnologia, mostrando a importância e a institucionalidade desse centro de síntese, que tem importância não só para o Brasil, mas também para toda a América Latina e para o mundo. A presença dos convidados internacionais, de centros de síntese internacionais. Queria também ressaltar a presença da doutora Zaira Turki, presidente do CONFAP, mostrando também a capilaridade desse centro de síntese, que agora tem a importância também em todos os estados da federação, onde as fundações de amparo à pesquisa dos estados estarão presentes. E gostaria de agradecer à USP por albergar esse encontro, mas também à FAPESP. A FAPESP tem sido parceira fundamental nas discussões do Centro de Síntese em Biodiversidade. Desde o início, há praticamente 2 anos, a FAPESP, junto com o CNPq, e esqueci de falar da CAPES. A CAPES também está, desde o início, participando dessas discussões, mostrando que nós temos uma institucionalidade extremamente importante, que mostra a importância desse centro de síntese. E eu gostaria de ressaltar que a síntese da informação sobre a biodiversidade, ela tem um papel fundamental como fonte do progresso científico em biogeografia, evolução, conservação. E a gente tem significantes avanços na ciência sobre a biodiversidade e a informatização de coleções de museus, dos dados sobre as espécies, o nosso entendimento sobre a vida das espécies, árvores e toda a biodiversidade, a informação sobre a tecnologia, ela vai contribuir muito para a síntese em larga escala nos próximos anos. E a síntese é extremamente importante. Nós somos uma das maiores biodiversidades do mundo. Nós não podemos deixar de estar presente nesse novo momento, que é a síntese do conhecimento, onde a gente vai gerar novo conhecimento, que é extremamente importante. E eu gostaria de dizer que a Enciclopédia da Vida, ela vai se tornar uma fonte de integração sobre a informação da biodiversidade em várias áreas, na taxonomia, na fitogenética, na morfologia, na genética, na biogeografia, na ecologia, na conservação, e novas formas de análise e combinação de grandes números de dados será necessário para fazer o uso sinérgico da Enciclopédia da Vida, juntamente com cientistas e de todo o globo terrestre. E, então, a gente tem que integrar esse centro de síntese em biodiversidade que a gente está colocando no Brasil, que não tem um dono, o dono é o Brasil, e quem vai fazer somos todos nós, CAP, CNPq, CONFAP, Ministério da Ciência e Tecnologia, e principalmente os cientistas brasileiros com a comunidade internacional. Então, esse rápido acesso à informação, ela faz parte da evolução dos novos tempos, e a necessidade da síntese em biodiversidade fica cada vez mais premente frente ao crescimento populacional, mudanças climáticas e outras crises do meio ambiente que nós precisamos antecipar e descobrir. Então, eu gostaria de dar boas-vindas a todos. Estamos estruturando esse centro de síntese com a participação de todos vocês, e é por isso que a gente está aqui nesses 3 dias para discutir, nesse novo passo, quais serão os temas que serão selecionados para nós iniciarmos as primeiras ações do centro de síntese, que já se configura como uma realidade no Brasil. Queria agradecer a todos e muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Marcelo. Certamente, se nós estamos aqui hoje reunidos, a gente se deve muito ao empenho do Marcelo, que vestiu essa camisa, entendeu a prioridade, a oportunidade que um centro de síntese em biodiversidade representaria para o Brasil, e desde então tem movido todas as peças necessárias na infraestrutura do CNPq para que isso acontecesse, com o apoio enorme da Marisa, que é quem faz a ponte conosco, com os pesquisadores, mas certamente a gente não estaria aqui se vocês não tivessem tão imbuídos dessa oportunidade maravilhosa que a gente tem. Eu vou passar a palavra ao Fábio. Por favor, Fábio.
Bom dia a todos e a todas. Saudar aqui primeiramente os companheiros de mesa, o doutor Jolie, Marcelo, o doutor Saraiva e a Zaira. Bom, em primeiro lugar, gostaria de agradecer o convite para estar participando dessa mesa de abertura. Estou aqui representando o secretário Álvaro Prata, que não pôde estar presente, mas o CNPq vem rotineiramente nos relatando os avanços dessa iniciativa, então ele está bem por dentro do que é o centro de síntese. Me pediu que viesse aqui representá-lo, porque eu estou diretor de uma área onde o centro de síntese se encaixa perfeitamente, que é a parte de biomas, a parte de bioeconomia e a parte de biotecnologia e saúde. Então, acho que o centro vem contribuir muito aí para o desenvolvimento dessas áreas. Gostaria de ressaltar que o uso, o aproveitamento de dados já existentes para gerar novos conhecimentos é muito importante, porque a gente não deixa esses dados guardados, então a gente dá um novo uso para eles e gera novos conhecimentos para subsidiar aí as políticas públicas. Tem que ressaltar também que essa iniciativa, acho que ela tem que estar alinhada com já iniciativas existentes, para a gente ter uma maior eficiência aí na obtenção dos resultados. Então, não vou me alongar muito. O Ministério está apoiando essa iniciativa, o CNPq está tocando aí, a gente está sempre atento ao que está sendo realizado. Então, agradecer ao CNPq pela iniciativa, pelo envolvimento do Ministério. Então, vocês podem contar com o Ministério para o apoio aí ao Centro de Síntese. E gostaria de desejar aí um bom workshop a todos aí nos próximos dias. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Fábio. Na sequência, eu passaria a palavra à professora Zaira, representando a CONFAP.
Bom dia a todos. Cumprimento as autoridades e instituições representadas aqui na mesa, todos os participantes desse importante evento. Quero dizer que, do ponto de vista do Conselho Nacional das Fundações de Amparo à Pesquisa, eu, como presidente, fiz questão de estar aqui, acomodei aí um pouco a agenda para estar o dia todo aqui, para dizer que este tema é extremamente relevante para as fundações, seja o tema da biodiversidade, seja a questão do centro de síntese. E, nesse sentido, eu cumprimento e agradeço o Dr. Marcelo Morales, do CNPq, que sempre foi muito entusiasta da questão e nos envolveu também com muito empenho, não é, para que a gente também possa, como fundações de amparo à pesquisa, dar aí a nossa contribuição, como agência de financiamento dos estados, né, dar a nossa contribuição nesse importante projeto que é o Centro de Síntese em Biodiversidade. A FAPESP, que está aqui organizando, juntamente com a USP, o CNPq, né, foi a primeira fundação, é a mais antiga, mais sólida, e que serve de modelo para todas as demais fundações, mas hoje o conjunto das fundações, e nós somos 26, apenas o estado de Roraima ainda não possui a sua fundação, nós conseguimos ter uma capilaridade e atingir o Brasil no seu amplo espectro das diferentes regiões, das questões que são estratégicas para os diferentes estados da federação, e certamente nós só podemos considerar aí o pleno avanço da ciência, da tecnologia e da inovação no Brasil, se tivermos, né, esse envolvimento de todos os estados e o desenvolvimento de todos os estados. Então, a minha presença aqui, eu agradeço o convite, né, e reitero aí a importância para as fundações de amparo à pesquisa, para dizer que nós estamos juntos nesse projeto de centro de síntese, consideramos extremamente importante e queremos acompanhar, estamos acompanhando, mas queremos agora pensar nos desdobramentos, como é que a gente leva isso mais efetivamente para todos os estados, podendo ter o apoio, seja de financiamento, seja que isso esteja na agenda prioritária dos estados e das fundações, né? É esse o nosso objetivo aqui na participação, né? E trago aí o abraço a todos, o cumprimento pelo envolvimento das instituições aqui representadas, sejam as brasileiras, sejam as internacionais, né, e dizer que o CONFAP, de fato, tem trabalhado em parceria muito grande com as agências federais, CNPq, CAPES, Ministério de Ciência, Tecnologia e Inovação, FINEP, e também com organismos internacionais, buscando ampliar as oportunidades para os nossos pesquisadores, para os nossos grupos de pesquisa e para contribuir para o avanço da ciência no nosso país. Então, bom evento a todos, muito obrigada.
Muito obrigado, Zaira. A sua presença aqui é a expressão maior do interesse da CONFAP, do envolvimento das outras FAPs e certamente o que nós viemos a trabalhar aqui, gostaríamos de ter a maior permeabilidade nos estados, nas diferentes fundações, porque eu acho que é um trabalho intrinsecamente coletivo e nós vamos precisar realmente formar equipes de pessoas de todos os estados. Lógico que em momentos diferentes, as situações, os apoios vão ser diferentes, mas o importante é saber que a CONFAP está interessada e que as outras FAPs têm essa disposição de estarem participando do centro. Isso é alentador para a gente. Muito, muito obrigado pela sua... Eu sei que você mexeu a sua agenda para conseguir se encaixar para estar aqui. Passaria a palavra, então, para o meu colega, amigo de muitos projetos e iniciativas, e que hoje nos recebe aqui como anfitrião, é isso, Saraiva?
Isso, bom dia a todos. Obrigado, Jolie. É um prazer dividir essa mesa com vocês, professora Zaira, Jolie, Fábio, Marcelo. Em nome do Instituto de Estudos Avançados, eu represento a diretoria, que não está presente hoje aqui, eu sou presidente da comissão de pesquisa, então, em nome do IEA da USP, eu dou as boas-vindas a vocês. Para o IEA, embaixo. Para o IEA é uma honra tê-los aqui. Um evento como esse está totalmente alinhado com a missão do Instituto de Estudos Avançados, que é promover o avanço da ciência, em especial levando em conta essa transdisciplinaridade, que é a característica desses estudos de um centro de síntese. É chover no molhado falar para vocês da importância de um centro desses, mas não custa repetir, é muito importante. O Brasil tem um centro desses, nós todos conhecemos centros do exterior, sabemos da importância da síntese hoje em dia na ciência, nós temos uma riqueza de dados já disponível. O Brasil, em particular, no tema da biodiversidade e serviços de ecossistemas, é dos principais atores, e não faz sentido que a gente não tenha um centro desses no Brasil, devidamente em rede com centros do exterior, mas é importante que nós tenhamos um centro desse no Brasil para formarmos aqui as pessoas, para atrairmos para cá os colegas do exterior, sem prejuízo de irmos para o exterior também, evidentemente, mas não faz sentido não termos um centro desse aqui. Então, essa iniciativa é extremamente importante. Fico particularmente contente de ver aqui na mesa a presença de CAPES, CNPq e CONFAP, porque isso mostra justamente a institucionalidade dessa proposta e da capilaridade dela. Isso é fundamental para que esse centro realmente atinja seus objetivos, que é de fazer uma síntese em termos de Brasil. Então, nós precisamos nos unir como cientistas, e para isso a presença da CONFAP em particular e da CNPq e CAPES são extremamente importantes. Desejo a todos um evento muito frutífero. Eu vou estar aqui o tempo inteiro também, é meu interesse particular também como pesquisador, como o Jolie mesmo disse, né? Então, eu tiro aqui o chapéu e o paletó de IEA e viro só Saraiva daqui por diante. Bom evento a todos. Obrigado. E bem-vindos.
Bom, para encerrar essa mesa de abertura, queria dizer que, desde que essa discussão começou no âmbito da FAPESP, numa iniciativa do professor Ricardo Rodrigues, que trouxe a então diretora do CECINC para uma primeira conversa de como é que esses centros de biodiversidade poderiam acontecer, e depois o envolvimento do CNPq, através das discussões da avaliação do PELD e o interesse imediato demonstrado. Aquela conversa nossa na FAPESP meio que ficou só numa conversa, né, Ricardo? As coisas não caminharam assim, não se desdobraram como a gente imaginava. Então, quando o Jean Paul e a Marisa retomaram isso via CNPq, a gente achou que era a oportunidade de novamente aproximar o diretor científico da FAPESP, colocá-lo ao par e trazê-lo para o lado de apoiar a criação do centro de síntese. Então, nós temos todo o apoio da diretoria científica. O professor Brito não se encontra no país, por isso ele não pôde vir. O professor Luiz Nunes deve participar das reuniões aqui conosco ao longo do tempo e tentar já definir algumas coisas em relação a temas, modalidades, chamadas, enfim, sair daqui com alguns passos a tomar bem definidos. Então, eu acho que esse aqui é o nosso segundo workshop preparatório. Com isso, a gente meio que completa aquela fase inicial que tinha sido colocada, e agora a gente realmente vai partir para uma fase piloto para ver como é que isso vai funcionar. Então, nós temos 2 dias e meio, 3 dias aqui de bastante trabalho. Vamos, de novo, receber as críticas, sugestões de como funcionam centros de outras regiões. Professor Thomas Meager, Professor Laura Meager, Emílio, that will be Martin, that will be presenting, discussing here with us what are the experiences you have in your own country. We are going to have some contributions through Skype from Jérôme Chave, at least, and from the CECINC group, because you've been down this road for a longer time. You made very good things. Probably you made mistakes in the beginning, so if you can try to avoid those mistakes and use and learn. And at the same time, some of us, Jean Paul, Mariana Cabral de Oliveira, have been visiting centers in Europe and in the US and seeing how they work and how they develop. So I think here we have a very cream de la cream on this, and if we must get out of this meeting with a very solid proposal of the implementation of the Brazilian Center on Synthesis. And with that, I end this opening ceremony and ask Jean-Paul that will be carrying on the next. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you to attend this workshop and also to share your time and your ideas, so to plan these new synthesis centers in Brazil. So we will switch to English with a French accent in this moment. Well, so the idea of this presentation is just to give a background to all of you. We have in this room people that were in the first meeting and people that were not in the first meeting. So the idea is to give this common background about the history, the ideas that we discussed in the first meeting. And so this is the second meeting, as you can see, which is supported by CNPq, CAPES, the different state foundation, FAPESP, with a lot of people involved, as we just saw. Well, I need to say that the idea, the first idea of these synthesis centers was born in CNPq within this PELD program, so it's the long-term ecological Brazilian program. And this began in 2015 with the scientific committee in their report, where they said that it's really important to have stronger links between the PELD sites, and also to have a stronger link with stakeholders to be more able to fill this gap between science and practice. And so the idea is that we have a lot of data and we need to have some synthesis as a way also to integrate people. So this was in 2015, and 3 years later, so March 2018, so recently, we had the first meeting. And this is my personal feeling, is that the main word that can define the state of this meeting is the enthusiasm. So if we speak with Brazilian scientists, if we speak with scientists from abroad, if we speak with people that are already directing other synthesis centers in other countries, if we speak with the different stakeholders, there is a huge enthusiasm with this idea. So, and as you can see with these few photographs that I took, I think people really want to have a synthesis center. Well, I think I don't need to explain exactly for this audience what is a synthesis center, but which are the main topics that attract so many attention from all of you. I think the first one is that synthesis centers are ideal place to have a more collaborative work. So it's not competition, it's to work together, it's to see different perspectives from the same problem and to work together to get some solutions. So this collaboration is really a key word. The second one is that it's a good place to create, to incubate new ideas, to have new hypotheses, to have new models. So it's also a place where we can foster new research. So really the enthusiasm is related to this capacity of synthesis centers to not only doing synthesis, but doing also networks of people and promoting research in different institutions. And finally, I think that it's really important that synthesis centers can get people with different backgrounds from the academia, from outside academia, so to have this production of knowledge, considering these different backgrounds, is really important. And it's a way to facilitate these science policies synergies. So I think these, at least in my opinion, are the three main points that make synthesis centers a so attractive idea. Well, why synthesis centers in Brazil? I think we have very many reasons to have a synthesis center in Brazil. The first one is that we do not have any synthesis centers in the tropical region where the biodiversity is concentrated and where the main threats for biodiversity, the persistence of these biodiversities exist. So will be the unique synthesis centers in the tropical region, considering that the Australian node is not active anymore. So I think this is really important. But why Brazil? I think there are also several reasons why I think Brazil is the ideal place to have a synthesis centers in tropical region. First, because we have a lot of data. So data that were collected in the last 20, 30 years with programs like, as I showed you, PPBio and PELD, so huge programs that put together a lot of scientists from different perspectives. So we have a lot of data from all the biomes, and also we have studies from different drivers of changes or of impacting biodiversity and ecosystem service, not only land use and land cover changing, but also climate change, invasion, pollution, so we can do some comparisons. So it's the ideal world to have synthesis. We have data, we have data from different areas and from common issues like those drivers. The second point is that, third point is that we have a community well established. So this is our network from Cisbiota, so it's another CNPq project funded by CNPq, where you can see here the node. So node is the number of research, and the arrestes is the number of links that we have from 2005 and 2010, and here from 2011 to 2016. And we can see that the number of links, which is co-authorships among researchers, increases a lot in this short period. So we have a lot of people working together, so we have a strong network of people working on biodiversity and ecosystem service issue. So this is really positive. Another reason to have a synthesis center in Brazil is that I think this is a way also to increase the quality of our research. So Brazil is producing, so we have here a graph showing the amount of publication in this area, ecology, evolution, behavior, and systematics. So this is the amount of manuscripts, and this is one indicator of quality. So it's publication in the top 10% journals, so the most cited journals. So you can see that Brazil, when compared to Australia, Germany, and France, we are producing a lot in this area. But the main gap is in this x-axis. So the main gap is much more on quality. And I think that synthesis centers can have an impact at the short term, producing good synthesis, but also at the long term by creating this collaborative network of people in Brazil and also with people abroad. And so this network also tend to increase the quality of our production, at least on the long term. And another, I think, really important issue is that we need to make science more available, or to communicate with people that take decisions. So we need to have these two-way fluxes of knowledge between stakeholders and scientists. And we had in Brazil in 2012 an important change in the environmental legislation. And when we really realize as scientists that we need to give this evidence, this background to good decisions to be made. And if we don't do that, then I think we can expect the worst for biodiversity and the ecosystem service. And finally, I think this is the last reasons, at least in my opinion, is that synthesis centers are good, cost-effective facilities in the way that the initial cost can be high, the cost with infrastructure and maybe the cost with the permanent staff, but to get people together to have meetings and the fellowships, at least in Brazil, postdoc fellowships are much more or less expensive than what we see in Europe or in the United States. So these costs are really not so big to maintain groups making synthesis, and the output is really good. So I think it's a good cost-effective facility, and we need to have this. So we have this opportunity in Brazil to have a synthesis centers, but at this moment also we have a challenge which is a funding challenge. So Brazil is living a crisis, national one that is really important. As you can see, the budget from CNPq is decreasing, especially after 2014, and the funding for science is also decreasing in these last 4 years, and I think the perspectives for the short term, at least, are not so good. So this is really, so we have the opportunity, but we have also this challenge, and so how to construct synthesis centers without having so many funding available. So my main, so just in short, my main idea here is that we all want these synthesis centers. It's something that is needed, it's urgent, it's useful, but the main question is how we can do that. And so this is the reason why we are together here along these 2-3 days. And this how question is maybe subdividing different how subtopics. So the first one is if we want a physical center or if we want a more virtual one. So we will have here the example of the Canadian center, which is much more virtual. So Diana will present, and I think this is good also for our discussion. So which is the best for, considering that we do not have so many money available, so do we really want a physical one, or should we go at the beginning for a more virtual one? So we had this discussion, but I think it will be nice with the Canadian example to revisit this question. Another issue which is new both for the people that were in the first meeting and people that are here is that I think it's clear that we want a national center. But the national center can have one node or can have multiple nodes. For example, we can have a node, a physical space for meeting in Brasilia, but we can have also a space for meeting in São Paulo or in Rio de Janeiro, for example. And I think that maybe, and we need to discuss this together, maybe the fact to have multiple nodes and not only one node can facilitate funding arrangements. But we need to discuss this. What we want to have open codes, completely open codes, and the best will win, or do we really want to have oriented codes, so, or a mix of these two things? And how we can stimulate international collaboration. So do we want to have co-coordinators from abroad? Do we want to have to participate in calls with the SDIF Center, for example? So how we can foster this international collaboration. So this is only examples. So the main question is how we will implement these centers. We know that we want these centers. The main questions are how we will do that. And to plan the how, CNPq has funded a project, a 3-year project that is led by Mercedes Bustamante. And then we have also the involvement of FAPESP, Biota FAPESP especially. So we have this more or less 3 years of planning, how we want to get to this consolidation of the synthesis center. And we have here 3 phases. So we are in the phase 1, which is just 1 year. And the main idea of this first phase is to talk with people, to get experience from people from abroad, to understand what the stakeholders, what they want. So it's really planning, defining the goals, the governance, and so how we will proceed. The second phase that will begin next year, it's much more to have the first call. So first call not only for working group, so for synthesis group, but also a call for postdoc and senior fellowships. But still without a physical center. So with some facilities, probably from CNPq, but not with a physical center. And the idea along these 2 phases is to get a better idea on how we can establish, and I think that what we want is a physical center, so how we can really construct this permanent infrastructure. So what we have for the moment is, so we have a scientific committee with people from different regions of Brazil. we are composing this international advisor board, and I think that some people that are in this room will be invited to be in this international advisor board. And we want to have this administration supporting team, but for the moment we have Marisa working with us and supporting really hard our work. But this is more or less the structure that we want to have. So I will just present now what we discussed in the first meeting, and then what we want to discuss in the second meeting. So making a summary of what we decide in the first meeting is that these synthesis centers should be focused on this science practice link. So it should be much more a solution-oriented synthesis. We want to work in this implementation space between science and policies, and especially making this linking between the science and the evidence that will support the decision-making process. And it's important to say that this synthesis should be done as a co-working, as a co-participative way. So we need to have a participatory approach, a transdisciplinary approach to make people that will use the information be involved since the beginning of this synthesis. Second, we discussed about the infrastructure. So at least at the end of the first meeting, we don't want a virtual center, we want a physical center. And the minimal infrastructure that we want is to have 3 rooms. It's more or less what SDIV have in Germany, or what the Excellent Center of Environmental Decision has in Australia. So it's 1 main meeting room with 2 smaller rooms, and also with other rooms for the staff and for postdocs and senior people. It's important to have high performance computing support. So this is the minimal idea that we want to have here in Brazil. We also talk about the staff. So we think it is really important to have a scientific coordinator, and this is a full-time job, full-time position. It is not someone that will do other things. No, it's really someone completely dedicated to the center. We need to have a management team, IT support, communication support. And we also discuss about postdoc and senior, and we decided that postdoc and senior can be, they can have their own synthesis project and be linked to the center, but they can be also related to the working groups, and so work as a support to the working group. So we want to maintain this flexibility to have postdoc and seniors linked to the center or linked to the working groups. We need to have this multi-institutional funding consortium, and with this opening session we saw that I think we are in the good way to have that. So we need to have funding from FAPESP, CNPq, the other state foundation, from CAPES, and maybe from several other organisms that are not listed here. But this is one of the challenges. So how we can manage to have this multi-institutional funding consortium. And if we want to have this multi-institutional funding consortium, we need also to have a multi-institutional governance. So how, and this should be discussed. For the moment, we have the scientific committee. We are planning to compose the advisor board, and also we need to have a way to co-direct this program with CNPq, with FAPESP, and with other funding agencies. So this is what we discussed in Brasilia, March this year, and now we want to have this second meeting. Part of the second meeting will be to revisit some of the issues that we discussed in Brasilia, because here we have a mix of different people. So we have people that were in the first meeting and people that were not. So it's nice to have to refresh the ideas with this different group of people. So I think it's nice to refine the mission and main objectives, to revisit this mission and objectives. I think it's really important, and thanks to Laura to be here to talk about transdisciplinarity and evidence-based approach. So we will have a speech from her, and she will guide us in the discussion about transdisciplinarity. We need to talk about operational issues, and Marcelo called the attention that we need to have here a good idea of the topics for the first call for the next year. We need to talk about collaboration strategies, about this idea to have not only one node, but maybe more than one node in the same national center, and how we will deal with governance. We should at least begin to discuss about data share and management to see how people from other centers deal with that. Now, the idea, I think it's much more to move to open access idea that data should be available for everyone. So how we can do that. And also about funding strategies and potential partners. So this is the agenda for these next 3 days. Some of these topics will be discussed today with speeches and discussions, but others will be discussed in working groups. So tomorrow and on Wednesday morning, we will have working groups, especially to work on these missions, transdisciplinarity, and on operational issues. So that's it, just to give this background for you, and I hope that you enjoy the meeting. I think that Síntese centers are a place where we need to enjoy to be together and to discuss, to have new ideas, and hear new ideas of how to do the Síntese centers. And I hope also that you enjoy the beginning of the spring here in Brazil. So thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions or if we just proceed. Is there any initial questions? Or we can just proceed because we will have a lot of time to discuss also. So, is there a question? No. Yes, no. If there are not questions, we will do just a 5 minutes break because we need to copy some of the presentations, and so we'll come back, and also with John Kramer. So we will come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. So there is in live transmission of this session. So what Claudia is asking me is that if there are any question that you just present yourself, let's say name and institution, and then the questions, okay, for the whole day.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. We are going to start our first roundtable. The idea here is to learn a little bit from the other synthesis centers in different parts of the world. It was always very clear for us that these international partners are quite important for this planning phase, but also for the implementation phase of the Brazilian synthesis centers. And we are quite happy today to have 5 excellent, outstanding speakers that will share our experience with us. Unfortunately, we are having some problems to connect John Kramer. We are still trying to connect John. But the idea here is to start then with Diane. Diane is from the Synthesis Centers of Canada and is a professor of the British Columbia and also has a lot of collaboration with Brazilian partners. And then we will have Emílio Bruna. Emílio is from the University of Florida and is almost a Brazilian actually, right? And has a long list of collaborators in Brazil, is an expert on tropical ecology, and Emílio will share with us some ideas and also some interesting compilation of data and information on tropical ecology and the participation of Brazilian science and the relevance of the international collaboration to increase the impact of our science. And then we are going to have the contributions of Thomas Miger and Martin Winter. Thomas is from the Environmental Omnics Center in the UK, and Martin is the lead of the SDF in Germany. Both Thomas and Martin attended to our first workshops and are since then close collaborators of the Brazilian Synthesis Centers. So the idea here is to have 10, maximum 15 minutes for each presenter so that we will still have some time for discussion. And I understand that some of you have some slides, some not, but it's not a problem at all. This is really a very flexible roundtable. The idea was to hear from you what works, what is not working in the different centers, what we can do, and also the relevance of the centers for the tropical region and in ecology as a science as a whole. So then I have the pleasure then to introduce Diane, so the first speaker.
Grand. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to come. My name is Diane Shrivastava. I'm the director of the Canadian Institute for Ecology and Evolution. I thought I'd start by telling you what the CIE is. So there's kind of three things we do. So the main thing we do is we fund working groups. But we also fund training workshops, especially for early career researchers on skills, especially those skills like data science skills that are relevant to synthesis science. And finally, we're starting a data rescue initiative where we try to match up retiring professors with really important data sets, with graduate students who are able to help them get this data preserved in data repositories. So, in some ways, I shouldn't be here, because the CIE should not really be a success story. There's a lot going against us. First of all, we have never been able to get funding from a federal research council. So you guys are already off to a much better start than we were 10 years ago. We are only supported by membership fees paid by universities, which in the past has required people going cap in hand to deans of sciences and VP research people. As a result, our budget is, well, if you want to put it in real, it would be like from 100 to 120,000 a year to run our programs. As was mentioned before, we're a virtual center. For better or worse, we do not have physical space for working groups. So how on earth have we managed to pull this off? So in some ways, we're like the little synthesis center that could. And this is the story. So we have managed to trot along quite nicely for 10 years. We have funded over 500 researchers to this point, half of them in working groups, half of them in workshops. And here's a little pie chart showing where they're from. So the thing you need to know from this pie chart, the blue is basically Canadian university researchers. The orange are researchers from other countries. So always 2/3 at least of the people have been from other countries, from 21 to date. We've funded 20 working groups over those 10 years, especially in the last few years. The publications that are coming out are being published in places like Nature, Science, Proceedings, Ecology Letters. This isn't particular to CIE, this is particular to synthesis centers in general. And in terms of budget efficiency, here's a comparison of the cost per publication out of CIE working groups versus the cost per publication out of our normal research grants. So we're twice as cost effective as traditional funding. All right, so how do we pull off this small miracle? Well, there's a few tricks. First of all, those university memberships I talked about, we put them entirely towards programming. The directorship is competitive, and universities compete for the honor of hosting the directorship. So that means that universities are quite willing to put forward some money to pay for this. So for example, UBC, where I am based, has put forward money that pays for an administrator. They also pay for a teaching release for me so that I can free up time to be director. So we've kind of doubled our budget in that one step. We also applied for grants. Last year, I was able to, again, double the budget, add another 100,000 real through grants that we were able to use to increase the number of working groups that we could run. Because it's run at the university, we have no overhead costs. We have no rental fees. We have one paid member of staff. That means that we are very administratively nimble. So when opportunities come up, I can run after them full tilt without running into a wall of bureaucracy. We have a governance structure. There is a management board that meets a few times a year and gives me some direction, but that's about it. So the final ingredient, and the one that I'm really here to talk to you about, is that we have really encouraged co-sponsorship of working group and workshops, in particular with other synthesis centers. So I mentioned that we've funded 20 working groups. 7 of those 20 involve some collaboration with another synthesis center of some sort, either national or international. So for example, Martin will tell you that there's 2 CIE IDIV working groups collaborations. We also collaborate with Quebec Synthesis Center and other opportunities. Okay, so that's really spread the money quite well. So there are advantages, obviously, to being virtual. If money goes up and down, we don't have these fixed commitments that make it very difficult for us to continue. So synthesis centers have, it seems, a finite lifespan. Some of them have managed to basically survive for 10 years before funding agencies kind of tire of the novelty of them. And one of the advantages of having this more virtual and nimble organization is we are able to weather the storm a bit. I know this, the topic of, or the title of this session was best practices, so I thought I should throw in a few ideas. I feel fairly strongly that we need to have guidelines for the composition of working groups. This is just a personal philosophy. It's also based up by a lot of data that's now been compiled on the productivity of working groups. You probably know these papers, but they show that working groups that have greater gender balance are more productive. They also need to have a good mix of career stages. A recipe for a non-functional working group is to put a lot of senior faculty together in a room who are already overburdened with administrative responsibilities and perhaps not as spry as they could be on the data science and coding front. So you need to have like postdocs and PhD students that have those skills, energy, and time. I also feel that the best way to get the very best ideas coming forward is to have a very broad scope. The narrower your topic becomes, the smaller your pool is. And the smaller your pool is, the less likely you're going to have the truly excellent ideas and people coming forward. I also think that we should incentivize the open sharing of data and the reproducibility of analyses. It's probably not enough to say you should do it. It's probably better to have formal agreements that this shall be done. And this is linked in to some of the funding. There's a lot of evidence on other things to increase productivity. We should probably have discussion how many meetings. I feel like you know, 2 to 3 meetings is kind of where you start to hit some inflection point in that curve of productivity and number of meetings. Video conferencing can be quite effective as in the planning stages. And we really have to promote the achievements of these working groups, because that makes the case for continuing and new funding. And overall, I mean, I think you've done an amazing job here of trying to bring together a very broad consortium of people from across the country and across the funding landscape. At CIE, I also strive to make this never feel like an insider's club, that there's always transparency and that there's always an opportunity for people across the spectrum to apply and be involved. So happy to talk to many of you in the next 3 days. Here are ways to get in touch with me if you want to continue the conversation beyond that. Thank you.
Queria agradecer o convite, primeiro. E me avisaram que a língua franca era inglês, então, a partir deste momento, é bem capaz de eu falar rápido demais, de me empolgar com o que vamos conversar aqui. Se alguém atrás poderia me dar um alô, dizer que eu estou falando muito rápido. Tabarelli, contigo. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for the invitation, which was, to me, a bit of a surprise, because I'm not actually someone who works at a synthesis center or was a postdoc at a synthesis center, although as a researcher I was able to take advantage of being a participant at a synthesis center. And instead I think maybe I'm here because I'm at the University of Florida, and the University of Florida is probably the institution outside of Brazil that is currently training the largest number of Brazilian scientists, that has the most research engaged on topics related to the Synthesis Center. So we have a lot of experience with dealing with things like the complexity that goes with doing international collaborative research, much of which is multidisciplinary in nature. So I'm happy to talk about that a lot. But what I wanted to come and talk today is a little bit about the importance of the international component that's related to this research in the Synthesis Center. This is a really interesting figure that Juan Pablo Perin recently put together. This is the world map scaled by the number of publications by authors from different countries that are in the world Web of Science. So this is the entire Web of Science. This won't come as a surprise to anybody who does research in this field, which is that you see that most of it is concentrated in the global north, and there's very little in the global south, with the exception of where we are here, which is still less, relatively speaking, compared to other countries, and has grown considerably. But this, I think, is a really important situation to keep in mind, in part because of this. It's not often you see Kofi Annan in a talk on biodiversity and ecosystem services, but I think actually in this essay in Science had something really important to say about science in general, and in particular in science in countries like this. And what Mr. Anand said was that 95% of the new science in the world is created in countries that comprise only 1/5 of the world's population. Much of that science is neglects the problems that afflict most of the world's people. And this unbalanced distribution of scientific productivity, which I showed you in the first slide, generates serious problems not only for the scientific community in those developing countries, but for development itself. It accelerates the disparity between advanced and developing countries, creating social and economic difficulties at the national and international levels. Scientific productivity, regardless of discipline, is a major driver of socioeconomic leveling at the national scale and at the international scale. So thinking about productivity, whether it's about biodiversity and ecosystem services or the spatial distribution, doesn't matter. Productivity and the science that emerges from it is a really important way for countries in the global south to become a bigger player on the world stage and to reduce the economic inequality that we're worried about. So if you actually go and look at the type of research that's being done in this particular field, this is work from a study that was led by a group of students I was working with. We actually reviewed the papers in some of the journals that actually focus on the kind of research that's done here. This is about 1,300 articles that were published in Biotropica and the Journal of Ecology over the course of 10 years that were collaborative papers, so they had more than 2 authors. And what you see here is actually a really interesting pattern, I think. almost half of the papers published in these journals, this is work that was done in tropical countries, was almost entirely by researchers based outside of those countries. So you can ignore the flags. It's not that it was done by researchers in the US. I mean, this means foreign researchers. 28% is 100% by local scientists. That's good. That's what we want to see. People are doing research and publishing in the country where they're based. But I think this number was particularly interesting, which is that only 27% of the research that's been published in these two leading journals that focus on these synthesis centers questions are based on international collaboration. And so what we want to see is this number bigger. We want to see that number at the very top smaller. The question is, what about this number right here? What should we think about this? To try to get at this, Stefano Alessina, who's a computational ecologist at the University of Chicago, and I reviewed about 1.25 million articles that were in the Web of Science, actually Scopus in this case. These were published between 1996 and 2012 in 8 different subjects, one of which was ecology, another was evolutionary biology. So I'm going to show some very quick results of an overview of all fields. The results are pretty similar if you look at them overall or individual fields. And then I'll focus on ecology, and I hope you'll get excited about that result there. So the big picture result, and if you really have questions about all the stats that went into it, I'm happy to talk about it later, is that international collaboration has a very strong and positive effect on the performance of individual articles. So if you take any given research article and you look at the number of countries on the list of co-authors, the more countries you have represented on that co-author list, the more likely it is that that article is going to be cited relative to other articles in the same journal in the same year. So you can correct for this by when they were published and what even specific journal. So if you look at the article next to it in the journal on either side, that article with more countries on the co-author list is going to be cited more than its neighbors. Okay? And the more countries you have represented on the author list, the higher the tier of journal, whether, impact factor, perception, whatever you want, the higher tier that those articles are going to be published in. And this is after correcting for all the things that we know influence this. Number of authors on the list, what journal they're published in, how many citations they have, you name it, all things being equal, the more diverse an author list, internationally speaking, geographically, the higher impact that article is going to have. But that national identity matters. And what you can see here is, first of all, here we're looking at the journal placement for articles that are written entirely by US authors or entirely by Brazilian authors. And all of this is laid out in detail in the actual paper. But if you look here, the United States is kind of the reference point. And what this tells you over here is that articles by entirely Brazilian teams are ending up in journals that are far lower than you would expect in terms of impact factor, statistically speaking. Right? So there's lots of reasons for this. It could be biases. It could be that authors from Brazil are aiming lower than they should. Right? There are lots of reasons for this. But the fact is then that when you instead look at articles that are collaboratively written, those move up in terms of the impact factor of the journal in which those articles are published. Right? In other words, working together, in this case US, Brazil teams, the articles are going to end up in higher profile journals than if you work entirely with authors based in your own country. If you look at citation performance, this is even more impressive. So this is the number of citations that an article receives relative to other articles in the same journal published in the same year. US is down here, Brazil is up here. In other words, they may not end up in the better journals that you would expect them to, but they sure are cited a lot more than the other articles in the same journal. But again, if you look at the collaborative articles, the citation impact is amongst the highest. In other words, working collaboratively here not only gets the work into better journals, but that work has a bigger impact on the field, measured in at least this metric right here. And in fact, you can see this. I mean, this is a group that people here already know, and Jean fortunately showed some of this a little bit earlier. But I actually pulled this morning, which is why I was 5 minutes late to meet everybody. But this is about 2,836 articles that were published in the Web of Science between 1985 and 2014 or something. That's all I had time for. I couldn't get the most recent ones. It's about 13,000, almost 14,000 authors for these articles. Every one of those articles has a Brazilian somewhere on the list. And this is where the authors of those articles are, right? So there's already a global reach that Brazilians have in terms of their collaborations. So the trick is that this Synthesis Center has the opportunity to leverage these collaborations in ways that not only promote national science, but promote the international impact of this science. So I'd like to, thinking about best practices, the best practices, I mean, the list that we got in the first presentation was really comprehensive. You know, the thing I would emphasize there, the best practice I would add, is to not just be sure to include international collaborators, but to think about the nature of those international collaborations, the inequities that come with international collaboration, and to try to use those international collaborations strategically in terms of the impact, because it's not just the science itself, but the indirect results that come with that higher productivity. This is from another paper we worked on in which we reviewed the distribution of editors on editorial boards over the course of 30 years for, I think it's 28 journals, 25 journals in ecology, evolution, and conservation, 24 journals. And what you can see is that basically almost every editor, 70% or so of the editors are in only 2 countries in the world. If you add another 2 countries, Canada and Australia, you have the vast majority of editors for scientific journals. There are lots of reasons for this. The country that, even a country with its tremendous scientific productivity and international reach, like Brazil, still is severely underrepresented on the editorial boards. And so the Synthesis Center like this, I think, plays an important role, not just in terms of the science that's being produced, but in the broader way in which science can improve and become a more diverse and inclusive enterprise. And so with that, I'll hand it off to the other experts here, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mercedes, and muito obrigado to the organizational team for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to just say a few words about the Environmental Omics Synthesis Center in the United Kingdom. EOS is born of a thematic program in the Natural Environment Research Council. It's a relatively finite Synthesis Center compared to some of the larger ones that are in existence. We are a virtual center. Basically, the Environmental Omics Synthesis Center is driven by sort of a meeting of omics is a field that is very strongly influenced by technological advance. And at the same time, there are all sorts of environmental challenges that are very broadly based biologically. And our Synthesis Center is essentially a meeting ground of those 2 different challenges. There's the technological challenge presented by advances in omics, and then there are the environmental challenges presented by basically better understanding of biological interactions and biological relationship to the environment. We have a number of activities that we do. A lot of what we do is community and partnership development. We've had annual conferences. We've funded a series of fellowships over the life of the program. We've had discipline hopping, competitive research schemes, training, development of infrastructure, and visioning workshops. Now, there was a comment by our Canadian colleague about you know, basically operating on the goodwill of the people who are involved. And actually, any synthesis center, any center is basically based on the goodwill of participants, and ours is no exception. Our actual funding from the Research Council is relatively finite, but a lot of what we do is we actually meet with representatives from the Research Councils and advise them on investment. So, for example, this started out as a program of the Natural Environment Research Council. We've been successful in building relationships and ties with the Science and Technology Facilities Council, which is another funding body in the UK. We have a program executive board that includes representation from both research councils. And actually, the people who attend those program executive boards have the authority and power to make investments, not quite on the spot, but for example, at a recent meeting of the program executive board, we were discussing a funding call that just concluded, a synthesis call, and we talked about the theme, and the representative from the Science and Technology Facilities Council said, well we could invest in that. And on the train ride on the way home, I got the email where basically STFC had approved to match 100% what NERC was putting into that call. So we were able to double the scope of it. So a lot of what we do is actually make advice and in some cases benefit from that advice. We tend to look at, in our fellowship scheme, this is basically our current portfolio of research fellows, and we tend to look at it, although they're doing, obviously, their individual research fellow things at different institutions around the UK, but we tend to look at it as sort of a programmatic portfolio of activities, and actually sort of think about, you know, if there's another fellow, where are they going to fit into this sort of series of hexagons of different kinds of activities. And so in a sense, we're sort of looking at this kind of at a programmatic level in terms of what kind of impact might arise from these fellowships. Basically, this is a slide from Pete Kill, our director. Actually, all of these slides have been from Pete Kill, our director. But basically, we sort of, this is a way of kind of trying to represent sort of the various aspects of our research portfolio, looking at changes over time, changes over space, various kinds of diversity, biological diversity, and also various levels of biological complexity. Omics, by its very nature, is very broadly based. One of the things that we also do is actually reach out to and look at what different disciplines are doing. And we've actually sort of, this is partly through Science and Technology Facilities Council. A lot of what they fund is astronomical research through their space program. So we've actually had meetings with astronomers to sort of look at the way they handle things like big data. And they have data challenges that make the data sets that we look at in biology small. For instance, there was a recently published map of all of the stars in the Milky Way, something like 400 billion stars. That's a pretty big database. And they have various ways of organizing that and making it accessible to the community. And we're looking at that in terms of thinking about ways to structure omics data and biological data more generally. And just, I'm going to finish, finish by talking a little bit about some outreach that we've done, or trying to engage actually with Brazil. And this is a program of Pete Kill's, looking at Terra Preta do Indio in Amazonia. This is part of a network of researchers, TPINet, and actually a recent phase of TPINet was funded by funding from the International Opportunity Fund from the Natural Environment Research Council. It's multinational, but obviously a fairly large segment of that is based in Brazil. And this is basically looking at ways to integrate omics data across this vast network for organisms that are specific to Terra Preta do Indio. More recently, we've had funding from the Science and Technology Facilities Council to look at various means of remote sensing and applying remote sensing to biological complexity. This is a group of us that went into the field October, just about a year ago. And actually, I'm pleased to say that this group was roughly 50% Brazilian and 50% UK. The funding was from a UK source. And we were doing preliminary efforts to look at various ways of applying different kinds of technology to, in this case, archaeological sites that were the basis of work by Eduardo Neves here at the University of Sao Paulo. And this is just one example of an output from that. So omics is genomics, but actually we're now looking at spectronomics, or looking at spectral properties in the field. And this is basically an example of a use of a three-dimensional multispectral image to isolate individual trees in the canopy of a tropical forest. So I have to say, it's one of the things about all of this is it's just a lot of fun. I mean, you know, engaging internationally, going to different places, and applying novel technologies to sort of do different kinds of things. And that's what one of the things the Synthesis Center affords the opportunity for. It's just fun. So never forget that part. Yeah, there's the whole thing. Most recently, we were able to engage with funding from the Newton Fund, the British Council, and FPESB in a remote sensing for biodiversity and ecosystems services inventory workshop that was held at INPI, joint leadership by me and also Joan Ometo, who's here today. And again, science is fun, and the more synthetic, the better. So I'll leave it at that.
And I would rather like to sit, because I don't know, I don't have much to say, because I already said a lot in the last meeting, and our center didn't change in the last half year. Very briefly, so I see our center maybe something like the possible future, if this is wanted, of the Brazilian exercise, because we are a physical center, and we are really different to most of the other centers, which I usually say, because we are part of a whole research center. So we are not just a single entity somewhere, but we are part of a larger research center, which is funded by our research foundation for possibly 12 years. We are right now in the phase of applying the last 4 years, which we have to do in 2020. So our funding runs once we have this agreement of the next 4 years for 4 years. But since our funding agency works on time slices per year, we also have this 1 year calculation, and but in general we have security for 4 years. We're quite big compared to what is planned here, which is good for on both sides. Good that we have more money, but it's also good to start small. And I think it's also for me good. I'm not sure about Tom, but I'm leading the center since the beginning, so I'm one of the person who did lots of mistakes and can tell you about that. And we learned mainly from them. What else? We have postdocs. We have the possibility also have working group postdocs, but not all of our working groups at the moment. It's maybe 1 out of 9. In the last call, which has a working group postdocs, and we have individual postdocs. But if you have postdocs being there and prolonging them, and you have every year call, of course, the math tells you that you can't have every year new postdocs. Otherwise, you grow hugely, and even this is not possible with our funding. So that's mainly our governance works like we have an advisory board similar to the Canadian Center, which is international in a sense that these are international people working in Germany. It's much easier to bring them together. And we meet once a year, and usually for doing the decisions and also discussing a bit of the next year and long-term decisions. But I also have a few people in my center which are part of the advisory board, but sitting, basically in the same floor, which I meet over lunch, or we have really doodling some meetings where we have to discuss for 2 hours certain things, as we did last week, for example, for the upcoming call, because we adapt every year, actually, which is a pain. We adapt every year some things to improve slightly our process. So I think it's also good to think about the process. I was thrown in the cold water at the beginning and had a lot of money, and so we changed the process every year to be better, and that's also makes things more complicated. I think I said this already, and I'm super enthusiastic about that, and I think now we learned even more why the center can be only a success if you do it correctly. But what the center in Germany maybe hasn't done as much, but it wasn't maybe also not necessary, because everyone was standing behind the idea, is doing as you do, having the opinion of the whole community and thinking about how this virtual center should work, and especially in such a large country where the funding is distributed not evenly. I think this is the best you can do, asking the community for how you think it should work and getting all kinds of opinions, and they are different. You have different people working marine, terrestrial, and etc. I think that's the perfect way to plan something, and also to have the stakeholders and the funding agencies here, which, as far as I'm aware, are behind the idea and still struggling maybe a bit with the administration, the details, which can be really a pain. And I will not use the 10 minutes. I'm here for answering all the questions. As I said, I'm running this in 6 years with lots of money and with lots of mistakes, and I'm happy to tell you. And the setting is a bit different, which is good. I can tell you about our setting. Yeah, I think that's it. And I gave a presentation the last meeting, and saving time.
Thank you, Martin. I think we are ready now to have John's presentation. Okay.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. Please let me know if you can't.
Yeah, much better now. Thanks.
Okay, must be the air conditioning. I'll speak quickly so you don't get too hot. Well, I apologize for not being there in person. I think it would be much better and great fun for me to be there. I'm just going to spend a few minutes. I think you might know the background of Sync, but we're probably a bit of an outlier, sort of on one end of the spectrum from virtual to bricks and mortar centers. We had the great fortune 8 years ago to receive a large NSF grant that's since been renewed, and really an ability to design from the bottom up a center that included both infrastructure, people, and a design to try to do something different, at least in NSF's eyes. You all know the history of synthesis centers. What NSF wanted from us and has been part of our mission is to really be interdisciplinary and to focus very much on bringing together a whole set of different sciences around environmental problems that had not worked together in a synthesis setting. So that means for us, just in some basic statistics, roughly half of the people that come here would identify as some form of natural or biophysical sciences. Most of the rest will identify across a broad spectrum of social sciences. And that presents a whole series of challenges that helped us in the design of the center. Part of that design focus was thinking that it's very difficult to do interdisciplinary work. Most people haven't done it on the scale that we think is necessary, and so it required that we build in quite a bit of both infrastructure, by that I mean computational infrastructure to handle a variety of different kinds of data and knowledge, but also people infrastructure, meaning staff who can specifically work to help bridge disciplinary divides. And I think also the notion that we would not necessarily just put out RFPs, but we would have an entire practice built around learning the challenges people are facing, helping them bridge those challenges, and working very carefully with teams and leaders of teams to build their capacity to do this work. And I think perhaps what's embedded in this as a best practice is to think really carefully about what you want to change. What is the mission and what is it that you want to change with respect to the science that's being done? And so for us, we think very much about producing a different kind of science. We think very much about building capacity for the people who come here. And we also think that the notion of fundamental but actionable science that can mean more than just to peer audiences, is really critical, and to try to build support systems to help that. Just a few numbers. At present, we're in year 7. We handle about 900 visitors a year. At any given point in time, we have between 30 and 40 projects in play. We have 20 postdocs on site, and then a graduate program that now has, I think we've got about 15 graduate student research teams underway. So we're big. I think piece of this puzzle, and I really agree with everything that everyone else on the panel has said with respect to the core best practices of synthesis. The notion of building ways for people to be together, to take best advantage of the time they have together when when there are meetings. I would add a couple things to that, and again, this is based in large part around the level of interdisciplinarity here. People need to understand and to get help in building shared conceptual frameworks in an interdisciplinary sense. We work quite a bit with teams on that, which means active facilitation of teams. The second piece of the puzzle, or perhaps the first piece of the puzzle, is to work with leaders so that they don't just take for granted that every meeting will work. Agenda planning, thinking very purposefully about challenges around getting people to talk to each other, both in formal and informal senses, is a really important part. It sounds almost trivial to say that you really have to work on an agenda. The reality is people don't do that very well, and their meetings suffer for it. And then a variety of different kinds of computational support. one of the things that we find here is probably 90% of the teams that come take advantage of a fairly robust, not just cyber infrastructure, but a large computational team that can help them with quantitative data, qualitative data. More and more we're seeing individuals focused on qualitative data, and which presents a whole series of interesting and important challenges to make that work. I think finally, one of the really important pieces for us in the realm of capacity building is a series of courses all designed around a focus on what are the chief skills that would really enhance teams. Our computational support is not based on doing for, it's based on helping people learn how to do the work. And I think that's we have classes and short workshops. And I'll just simply end by saying the notion of transdisciplinary science for us is very much about code development, something that we heard about earlier today. About 20% of the people who come here will not identify as an academic scientist, or they may be researchers, but they're found in government agencies and non-governmental organizations and other kinds of groups, including industry. And so getting those people in the room from the very earliest stage, I think, is an important best practice. The questions change, the approaches change, and the notion of use-inspired science demands that you have those people well engaged early on. I can talk a little more, answer specific questions. I think I'll stop now, and hopefully we'll keep the band open and we can continue to talk. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. So before we start with the questions, I think we forgot a quite important step. It's a general introduction of the participants. Maybe we can just do a very quick round of introduction. Yes, so that you can have also an idea who is here and where they come from. Then maybe we can... Só para fazer uma rodada de apresentação. Não, o Johnny já se apresentou. Não esquece o Johnny.
Good morning, my name is Leandro. I'm from RNP, the National Research Education Network in Brazil, an organization similar to Internet2, or Canary, DFN, or JISC, Janet, just to explain to them. And I'm from the Research and Development Department. Thank you.
Bom dia, my name is João Meto. I'm from the Earth System Science Center at the National Institute for Space Research. And I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ima Vieira. I'm from Museu Guild, an institution of Ministry of Science and Technology in Belém.
Bom dia, I'm Maite Piedade. I'm from IMPA. It's an institution in the Manaus region and working with science anyway.
Hi, I'm Laura Barr. You'll be hearing a lot from me in just a minute.
Hello, I'm Marisa Mamed from CNPq, our National Research Council. I'll be helping people with management of the Síntese Center.
I'm Valério Pilar. I'm from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in the Department of Ecology, and I'm a member of the committee, the scientific committee, which is organizing, helping to organize the center.
Good morning. I'm Antonio Marques. I'm from the University of São Paulo here, and I work on marine biodiversity.
Good morning. My name is Mariana Oliveira. I'm from the Bioscience Institute here at the University of São Paulo and also part of the Biota program within FAPESP.
Bom dia. My name is Gislene Ganadi. I'm from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, Northeast Brazil, in Natal.
Department of Ecology.
Good morning. My name is Gerhard Overbeck. I'm from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, from Department of Botany. So Rio Grande do Norte, Rio Grande do Sul.
Hello, I'm Thiago Rangel. I'm a geographical ecologist at the Federal University of Goiás.
I am Sidney Tomás from the University of Maringá, located in South Brazil, state of Paraná.
Good morning. My name is Robson Caprets. I'm from Boticário Group Foundation, an NGO who provides funding for research in biological conservation.
Hi, good morning. My name is Gustavo Romero, and I'm an ecologist from the State University of Campinas, Unicamp.
Bom dia, Olivier Fudim. I'm the representative of CDRS, which is the French Council for Research in France, for Brazil and the South Cone.
Good morning. My name is Blanche Viana. I'm from Federal University of Bahia. I'm an ecologist, and I'm so glad to be here.
Hello, good morning. I'm Fábio Scarano. I'm with the Federal University of Rio, and I'm also associated to the Center of Sustainability in Rio at the Catholic University, PUC.
Hello, my name is Renata Pardini. I'm also from the Institute of Bioscience here in the University of São Paulo. I'm an ecologist and zoologist.
Bom dia, eu sou Débora Drucker. I'm Débora Drucker. I work at the Embrapa, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, and I work with data management.
Morning, I'm Rafael Loyola from the Federal University of Goiás, an ecologist working with conservation biology.
Hello, Sérgio Lucena from Federal University of Espírito Santo and Mata Atlântica National Institute.
I'm Paulo Demarco from the Federal University of Goiás, also an ecologist, and, well, we're from Goiânia, the best pamonha in Brazil.
Hello, my name is Katrin Winkler. I'm from the German Research Foundation. I'm representing here German Research Foundation in Latin America. We have an office here in Sao Paulo, and from here we are collaborating with our partner organizations in Latin America.
Marcelo Tabarelli, Federal University of Pernambuco, and a member of the Scientific Committee.
Good morning, Kátia Torres from ICMBio, Brazilian Institute for Protected Areas.
Good morning, my name is Ricardo Ribeiro Rodrigues. I'm from USP. I work with forest ecology and restoration. I had a good experience with Síntese, with John and Margaret. Hello. Yes.
Good morning. Luis Nunes. I'm a physicist from the University of São Paulo, but I'm here representing FAPESP.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ana Fioresi. I'm from the Brazilian National Water Agency, and we are here to represent the stakeholders' demands.
Hi, good morning. My name is Flávia Oliveira. I'm from Brazilian National Water Agency too.
Okay, thank you. I think we have everybody now. So John, as you can see, the first point that we need to improve is the inclusion of social science in our group. I think most of the attendants are from the natural science, and I think this is really an aspect that we should improve for the next phase of the Síntese Center. So just a remark, because I don't know if you could hear the introduction of everybody, but I think almost all of us come from the biological conservation and science. So now we can open for questions, that maybe we can take 3 questions at a time. So then we start with Jean Ometo. And
thank you very much. And thanks for the short and inspiring talks by everyone. So I think one question is, and I forgot to say, I'm here also as a representative of FAPESP Climate Change Program, which I think needs to have closer connection to this effort for sure. And so the question is that, so Emilio said some interesting aspect in terms of impact of the science done collaboratively. And I think that's the base of the Síntese Center. And but there's one question that I haven't heard a lot, and I think the experience of everyone might be very important at this stage, is that how actually those information constructed, and how is the process to construct a specific outcome from a synthesis effort to influence a decision, to get into the process of linking the decision from the scientific community towards well, the policy arena or whatever decision making. I think John brought an issue of bringing into the discussion from the very beginning people from other parts of the society, other stakeholders, industry or NGOs and thus far. And so a little bit, I don't know if this has been discussed in the past in the prior meeting, but how actually the centers that you represent or you've been working with deals with this issue, how actually the bridge between a good science developed by the collaborative research and synthesis centers become an effectively, let's say, result for to influence or to inform decision. Thank you.
Marcelo, and then 3 questions, and then you can talk.
First of all, I would like to thank Thomas, Martin, Diane, John for the contribution since the beginning of this discussion, and it's really important your background about this initiative. And what I want to hear from you, from your perspective, what have you seen since the first seminar and about our discussion about the Synthesis Center, to hear from you the advantage and disadvantage of a physical and virtual center, looking at the Brazilian perspective that you saw since the beginning.
Okay, we can take a 3rd questions and then we Ghislaine. Okay.
John was mentioning that it's important to put people together when they start some meetings about solving problems. It's good to have people together beforehand so it could be more productive. But how you would like to, could you just give some suggestions of how, what are the best ways to put people together? Would you create an online discussion, or is it better to have people together beforehand? How does it work for your center?
Okay, I think we can start with John.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, to answer that question, how to start, I do think it's important to put people together before they physically meet, and we've tried to develop virtual communication systems that allow, certainly leaders, but also whole teams to get together. Some of that is, you have to face reality. People are really busy. They tend not to engage fully till they're face-to-face. But the more you can begin to seed an idea, have people come to consensus on at least the notion of what they're going to be doing, and I think that's really important. There's no getting around the need for good technology. We made it work today. I think you can make it work. The technology's out there. It oftentimes depends on bandwidth. But oftentimes what we do is we talk to the leaders of teams well before their first meeting here, and we ask them to begin a process where they're sharing not just the proposal, but the beginnings of ideas, the asking people to weigh in on what might be spoken about. There's a bit of a risk in this, in that synthesis projects evolve. They're not producing. Knowledge production is a tough thing to do, and teams over the course of the 2 years that they work with us sometimes end up with somewhat different outcomes than they originally anticipated. So I think the art in this is to open the discussion to build comfort around how a process is going to be developed, but also leave the door open for evolution. And that all can start with the beginning of sort of sharing what an initial framework would be, sharing some sense of what the first meeting would look like, and really trying to build the team culture well before people come together in a physical sense.
Maybe would like to address Jean's two questions about the impacts of science in decision-making process and how we can improve that.
Yeah, we get that question a lot, and I would refer back to a couple of things that I think are really important. We say fundamental but actionable here at Succinct, and for us, what that means is supporting the best possible synthesis science we can within the context of some work being useful over longer time frames and other work being more in a shorter term decision-focused context. And I mentioned one of the things about our theory of change is that we hope to be able to take the academic community and move them more towards use-inspired and shorter time frames. But the reality is not all science is going to be that way. The second thing I want to emphasize is we're funded by the National Science Foundation, and they're pretty clear that we are neither advocates in the sense of some NGOs, nor are we implementers. We don't make policy. So then the question becomes, what are the mechanisms that you really can move science into a decision context? And the reality is it takes time, and it takes the building of relationships, which is why co-development, I think, is so critical. In a lot of ways, we feel like having people who are closer to decision context, whether from federal government or NGOs, they not only understand and participate, but they become diffusers of the information, which is a good thing. And then there are certain cases where we do see information moving more quickly into a decision context. So, for instance, we had a team that developed an Endangered Species Act prioritization tool in direct connection with federal managers, and to think about how they might use that. That's one example. We could use several others. We've had postdocs who are developing. An individual who's looking at has looked at the live pet trade, mostly around amphibians, and focusing on how would you move that information into surveillance for movement of pets, these amphibians, and the spread of disease. And we've got another group that's done things on invasive species with live plant trade. So in each of those cases, there's these direct connections. It's a spectrum of the kinds of science we do here, but I think having conversations early on with those who are proposing to do research, trying to think about the appropriate avenues, try to think about the particular kinds of individuals they might engage who are not active scientists or not scientists in an academic sense, and then figuring out when is the right moment and what other kinds of potentially communication vehicles can be used. It's got to be a portfolio approach. There's no one size fits all. It's project by project.
Thank you. I think Emilio would like to complement. And then we can go.
I was just going to add that it sounds a little bit obvious, but if the working group would like to have as an outcome the shaping of either public policy via government or via community-based or NGO-based action, then they should probably include members of the NGOs or the public policy sector at the development of the project, instead of what typically happens, as we've seen in a lot of projects, is that you have a bunch of scientists, they do a bunch of cool research, the papers come out and they go, okay, great, now let's get this into the policy arena. But they don't necessarily have the expertise. So the inclusion of those people early on, and the other thing that we've found at the university that's been successful is that we actually have people who are skilled as facilitators to help make that possible, at least at the beginning of the project. It's very difficult for people who are engaged in the process to also facilitate what are often some complicated conversations about science and policy and relevance and direction, and it helps to have someone who's skilled to help people navigate the early stages of that in those first face-to-face meetings.
Actually, I have responses to two of the questions because I can't remember the third one. But we'll start with Jean. In terms of impact, one of the things that has been a function of EOS from the very start is we have a very proactive or active advisory group. In fact, my role in the center is that I'm chair of the advisory group. And that advisory group includes not only the usual suspects in terms of academic scientists, but we also include a number of stakeholders in that advisory group who help to shape calls that we do and also help to shape the way we react to those calls once they've happened. For example, we've had a member of our group from AstraZeneca, Big Pharma, and Big Pharma ended up actually jointly funding one of our fellowships, put a substantial money amount into it. Their interest is things like environmental toxicology or environmental origins of antimicrobial resistance, things that resonate with the overall mission of our center in terms of environmental omics. We have stakeholders from the Environment Agency, and they're interested in things like the way biological contributions to water quality. But so we have various people from different backgrounds. The European Bioinformatics Institute, very interested in movement of data and curation of data, a lot of that human data, but with, again, cognate interests in things that we do. In terms of policy, a lot of that actually is through the Research Council involvement. And in fact, that's one of our main conduits into sort of government departments. The Environment Agency is strongly connected to government departments. It is a government department. So there are various connections like that. We try to do that more at a programmatic level and then let that feed down through individual projects. And to respond to Marcelo, one thing that I meant to say, and I'll say it now, is that everything that we do is an experiment. And in fact, there was a fairly long lead up, a consultation period, documentation prepared, and looking at what other places do, just as you guys have done with your center before we started ours up. And I mean, in a way, I was noticing on one of Pete's slides that we've been in operation since 2011, which kind of shocks me because time goes by so fast. We just got a renewal from the Natural Environment Research Council for an additional 4 years, so things are looking good. But everything that we do is an experiment. And, we try things, we sort of look at the outcome, and I won't say some things worked and some things didn't, but you have to be prepared for that possibility and just think that, okay, this is an experiment just as you do in other things. So the next experiment comes along and maybe you do things the same way, maybe you try things a little differently. So, and I'm sorry about the third question. I can't remember what it was.
It's about how to put people together to talk.
Oh, people together to talk. We've done that both in sort of community level events where we'll have as many as 100 people in the room and small working group events with as few as 20 people in the room, and both seem to work pretty well. I don't really have any further comment on that, but it's just what I said in my talk. A lot of synthesis activity is dependent on goodwill of the community that you're working with, and that goodwill involves an element of a sense of inclusiveness. And I think if people, we actually deliberately try to aim at a fairly young demographic in some of our activities because basically we feel like they're the ones that, A, we're most likely to influence going forward, but B, they're the future of the field. And so I guess that's one thing I would say about people. But at at the end of the day, a major activity like this is involved. It basically is dependent on the goodwill of the people you're working with.
Right. So maybe I'll start perhaps with the question about the virtual versus the physical. The CIE was forced to be a virtual center from the get-go, simply because we didn't have the large federal grant that would have enabled a physical location. So it was sort of put on us by circumstance. Having lived through that model, there are some advantages. So the advantage is we can do a lot with a little, and we can weather variable finances very effectively because we don't have these commitments. There may be some parts of the Canadian experience that don't transfer necessarily well to Brazil. So in order to have a virtual center, you need to be able to put the PI on the grant. So a working group has applied for funding. You've accepted them. There is 1 or 2 leaders, PIs, of this working group that are leading it. So in the Canadian case, we transfer the money to their home university. A grant is set up by their university. They're able to access that money. That PI is then responsible for everything from that point on, finding the meeting location, reimbursing travel of the participants, and possibly booking their hotel if needed. So bureaucracy at the university level, I mean, we all complain about university bureaucracy. It's not so bad in Canada. I know it's more cumbersome in Brazil. So that would be the first thing, that this may be too much of a burden on faculty. The second thing is people generally use university facilities. That might be field stations, or it could just be rooms such as this that are available in their university. Our universities are virtually never closed down by strikes, for example. So just to think that there are some differences between the countries that we need to consider. I'd like to also address the question about how do you put people together. I think you meant this question particularly in terms of working groups, right? Is that okay? So normally it's self-organizing. So a proposal call is put out, and people put together their own teams. Now, of course, there are problems with that, because who do you think of to put together on a team? Well, you probably think of somebody in your same subject area, in your same demographic, at your same university. So, that's why we have rules about composition of working groups, because you need to stop those first impulses and get people to put together ones that are going to work well. But given that, it's self-organized. So it is not that we have a social engineering experiment where we say, you, and you come together, sit in a room, and do good science. I have heard about organizations who have experimented with that. It's not what's normally done in most of the big international synthesis centers, but it's sometimes done by certain organizations. So I hope that's clear.
Okay, Jean, your question, impact. So because we are part of another center, we have a science policy committee, but generally saying our funding agency funds, or the mission, one of the mission, I hope I'm correct, there is one employee here, funding basic science. So it's not necessarily, it's really different to CSync. So we don't have the overarching mission to funding science, which necessarily has to have a direct impact into decision making. So that's, as also John said, not all science has an impact on decision or on policy making, because it's basic science. But if there are groups, we try to support them in all kinds of ways. So we have a science policy committee at the whole center, because we have 9 professors, which are also doing science, which has to be resonated sometimes somewhere in the policy arena. So we have a group which tries to have tight links to all kinds of level of policy in Germany, also international, with whom we meet quite regularly. And there's also parts of science done in our center, in the Synthesis Center, trying to translate it into that. So we're asking politicians what you want to know, what is on your agenda right now, where do you want to have input, and then we see if there is any science produced in the Synthesis Center which might help, or we would think about funding certain topics which could help this process, along this process. But for my job, for example, that's why I'm sitting also in all these kind of committees. I can tell you, I sit in, Germans love to have committees, and I sit in all of them, because I always have to see what's going on in the Synthesis Center and what is maybe of need for politicians or whatever, and then I see, we have a group like this. But very often, and I remember the Synthesis Center meetings we had, a couple of those, and John was part of some of them. Impact of those groups is very often still storytelling. So even NCs, which is out there and still there, they have groups where they said, we have the group which, in the very end, after a long time, and I agree with John, it takes a while, was taken up by politicians and really changed decisions. It's nothing you can try to plan a bit, you can push it a bit, but it's also about, sometimes random choices what politicians takes up or whatever. And to find out and to quantify that, it's almost impossible. And for us, it's really storytelling. So I follow all the groups. I try to follow the science. We have an outreach office, which is very much engaging with the scientists once they have a publication, which is usually what our groups do, and then trying to put that in the right context for the scientists, but also for other realms. So there are knowledge brokers in Germany, which we try to work with. And if there is a science of which we think this might be relevant, we try to push this more towards policy briefs or something like this. So we also give support in that. We certainly could do better, but this is also not necessarily our main mission. But it's part of the mission of the whole center, so the synthesis projects and the synthesis science is there. And we had already some groups of which I also was part, which we even informed the European policy and was taken up and is really quite successful. So these kind of stories are there. Second thing about the setting of the center, I can agree there could be, I see advantages and disadvantages of having a physical and also virtual center. Virtual center, I fully agree, is a bit more, it could be much more administrative burden, so you have to, I think it would be very useful and helpful to have, if you know already that you go around in Brazil, and I think this is a big advantage in such a big country, especially if you know that the money is not evenly distributed and you want to have the buying in of all states and not just of the rich ones. I think if you have a good feeling where to be in, I'm just making it up, in Guyana or something, then it would be good if you have they have good researchers. So if you already know where to go and how to go, and you have the few hotels we work with, you have the rooms, and the rooms, and maybe you equip the rooms, not just relying on the professors, and then they have to find flip charts out of nothing. But if you can have certain places where even if it's 10, try to equip them a bit, that the people at these places can use the rooms wisely. And they are really, I think the room settings, it's quite important for our groups. We have rooms full of whiteboards, and they really make use of that. There are 2 PIs here. One has been there, Valerio also has been, and Diane is coming. I think the rooms are quite important, and if you can if you don't put everything on the shoulder of the PI, which I think it's a huge burden, doing reimbursement for 15 people, and if there are some internationals, it's a mess. And it's what I heard here, it's already a mess. But having people like me traveling and coming and having their routes and don't want to go with that airplane was another one. It's a lot. So try to plan this well in advance and give them support. But if you have the support from CNPq and which hotels to call, that would help a lot. So I think there are advantages in both things. Also, always the same place, and how to do the things also has advantages. But if this is not on the table, then try to make the best out of it. the last thing was coming before the groups, and I learned a lot from CSync with that. So this is coming for you, for Diane, in a few weeks. And what I'm doing is we do Skype calls before the groups come way in advance. Sometimes it doesn't work because the researchers are all in a sudden very busy, and if you have an Australian and a Brazilian PI, it's hard to find a time where you can both having on a Skype. And we take the time to make them aware what are the steps to engage with the group way in advance, as John said. But it also takes time. You know, there's a certain list of things we discuss with the groups, that they get in touch with their whole group and make them aware that they, you know, there's a week where they have to have tasks and readings and all these kind of things, and that should happen way in advance. But it takes time. I know that is much of John's job, and CSync is bigger, but think about that. If you maybe even have 4 groups funding, you have to have the time for that Skypes, for the doodling, and you have to talk to them, and they have to have the time. So it's not a simple job, but it's also nothing which, you know, is not already out there. There are many synthesis centers who have their best practices out, and you can learn from that. And I think this is what is more important is the choice or the decision you make when you fund groups about the PIs. So the PIs are really the running force for the groups. So, and if you know the PIs, and if you start with a Brazilian perspective and you know the Brazilian, really also make part of the decision making are the PIs. Do you know that those PIs may be able to run a show like this? So if you know there are people, and there are always people like this, having an agenda and just trying to push their thing, that might be not the right team having just some of those persons. I think it's very much also depending on the leadership of a group. You can help the leadership, but you can't change it. So I think part of the decision making should be balancing the group, gender engineering of the groups, which I'm doing quite a lot, not randomly, I agree, but leadership is very important. And I think if you this helps here, because I can imagine many of you wait just for the first call and writing the proposals, and hearing this and also making the leaders aware that this is a big task. And it will, in any case, whatever setting you have, it's a big task for the leaders.
Thank you, Martin. I think Emilio has a very quick
I just have actually a very quick question, which I had myself, and it relates to this question of both who is in the room in terms of the working groups, but also who's participating. And some of you, I think this Synthesis Center plays a really important role, not just because of what it's focused on, but where it is, and it plays an important capacity building role. Some of you may know that I'm the editor-in-chief of Biotropica. 2 of our subject editors are in the room, and they'll tell you that I think that one of the expectations here is if you build the center, the publications will come. It's both an implicit assumption, but also a product of what we've seen in some of the others. And I think that one of the things that we've seen, I mean, Biotropica could be renamed Brazilitropica tomorrow. It's where most of, the majority of our papers come from. And what we see is that you have this uneven landscape in terms of ability to work independently, ability to write, and ability to produce in the way that this Synthesis Center is expecting. And so I think the Synthesis Center also needs to have at least a conversation about who's going to be invited, or is the focus going to be on getting the best, which may come from a limited number of institutions or research groups concentrated in a couple of places in the country, or is it going to play a capacity building role, and in which case it might have to invest in terms of bringing researchers who are capable of producing this high quality science and the papers that would come out, but maybe haven't had the training in their own graduate programs, say, to put that research into a high profile publication or something like that. And so who is in the room is not just what the particular members are and how you found them. But I think for this center, it's actually a much more fundamental question of capacity building in what is, on average, high-profile research community, but one in which the variance can sometimes be large. And so I'll put that out there as a kind of a question of what the broader objectives are in terms of capacity building.
Thank you, Emilio. Unfortunately, we are a little bit behind schedule, so we have Laura prepared for the next talk, but I would like again to thank all the presenters, especially John for your patience with our communication problems. So, and the attendants will be here for the rest of the day and for tomorrow, I think, most of you, so we will still have time to discuss more deeply some of the questions they brought here. So thank you very much.
So I was asked to introduce Laura's talk, Dr. Laura Meager, and it's a bit difficult because I've read her CV many times, and it's impossible to fix many things because she has a large experience, beginning with professor at St. Andrews in Edinburgh, but then a large experience in governmental agencies as well, and industry sectors, and in evaluating programs, and maybe she could explain it a little better than me, but I had a chance to listen to a talk of her at CNPq recently, and I thought it's a very interesting experience for us to think about and plan this inter or transdisciplinary approach we're thinking of, because it's not an easy task, and from my perspective of a management team, it's a big responsibility, so we have to really think about it and plan it and have some stepping stones to proceed on. And I hope this will help us think about it and do it well. Okay. So, Laura?
Thank you. I'll stand up. Is this okay? Can people hear me? Great, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I've been lucky enough this is my third visit to Brazil in the year, so it's both comfortable and exciting to be here, and especially to be working with you on this Synthesis Center idea, which I think is ambitious, and it's the right time, and it's an exciting thing to be doing. I was given the topic Planning Transdisciplinarity, and I made the subtitle Making 1 + 1 = more than 2. And that's what I think transdisciplinarity is all about, and Synthesis Center is about, and I'll talk a bit about that. And I know you're at the how stage and the implementation stage, and I think you'll see as I go on that I tend to be very practical. I love vision, but I like to make things happen. So I hope I'll give you some helpful suggestions to think about. Nope, that's not right. Oh. I pushed this. Was I supposed to push this? It's not a good start. That's why you need technology infrastructure. So that is what I'm supposed to. Got it. Thank you. Sorry about that. So what I'll be doing, I'll give a little bit of an introduction, a little bit on terms and some background on component parts of transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and stakeholder engagement. And you'll hear some things I think we've been talking about already. And I'll try to suggest some practical lessons learned and come up with maybe a couple of concluding thoughts for discussion later. Just a little bit about me. Thank you, Marissa, for starting this. I'm just interdisciplinary all the way through. My PhD was interdisciplinary. I wanted to work between science and the outside world. I was very fortunate to work with the progressive governor of the state of North Carolina and his science advisor. And I co-founded way long ago, when biotechnology was new, a biotechnology center, which was virtual, just had a small team of us helping people in big and little universities across the state, people in big and little companies, state government, federal government, venture capitalists, the public, and I love that. I love that complicated, making change happen in that way. When I was a research dean at Rutgers University, I was again developing these complex initiatives, and my Fulbright fellowship was in institutional change, which I sometimes called how to help universities change in something less than geologic time. So my consulting is in strategic change, helping to bring about things like, closer, okay, thank you. Helping to bring about interdisciplinarity and knowledge exchange and impact from research, and then more and more evaluating funding schemes and programs. And in everything I do, I try to learn lessons and pass them along in peer-reviewed publications and informal briefing notes and master classes and so on. This is not to make a lot of money out of this book I co-authored because it's available free online, but the idea is to give you, this is sort of how I feel about all this. It's interdisciplinary research journeys, they're journeys going forward, practical strategies for capturing creativity, and it's that mix of practicality and creativity that I think is really important. And you can see the cover we chose is very colorful and uplifting and adventurous. Why do we bother with transdisciplinarity? You all know this, I won't go into it all, but the real important problems in the world today do not fit neatly into one discipline, and they cannot be solved by academics alone. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of need for collaboration and synthesis. Okay, this is about the only terminology I'm going to burden you with, but you'll hear these words used lots of different ways. Uh-oh, I have to make the... Multidisciplinary research is where you have separate disciplines. I often call it when people just staple CVs onto the back of a proposal, and there's no interaction, but there's just a bigger pile of lots of different disciplines. Interdisciplinary research, inter is important, that means between, there's overlap, there's interaction. This is where you begin to get synergies, you get more than the sum of the parts. And then, now transdisciplinary research, there are a lot of different definitions. People in the States often use transdisciplinary to mean really, really, really interdisciplinary. If you're in Germany or Switzerland and you say transdisciplinary, you usually mean lots of disciplines and stakeholders for sure. You have to have stakeholders. I've co-authored an article about the UK, and I've interviewed a lot of research funders, and we analyzed a lot of evaluations I did. And basically, research funders in the UK want interdisciplinarity, and they want knowledge exchange, engagement with stakeholders, but they said, oh no, please, 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 not another word. We don't want another word. So they don't like to use the word transdisciplinary. But for today, I think things are moving in that direction towards transdisciplinarity, meaning multiple disciplines and engagement with stakeholders. So multiple perspectives all the way along, and that's how I'll be talking about it today. And when we talk about transdisciplinarity, really we're talking about contributing to change in the real world, impact, we often call it. And that means integration of work from different disciplines because of the complexity, and it means engagement with stakeholders, which we often call knowledge exchange. And I'm going to talk about these two components separately for a minute, and then I'll try to bring them together. So there's bad and good news about those two components. Both of those are very challenging, but the good news is that both of them are processes. And I use this slide when I talk about interdisciplinarity, but I think it's true for transdisciplinarity. It's not a single uniform research method. It's not a static black box. But transdisciplinarity is a process. It's a journey. And once you see something as a process, you can learn about it. Once you can learn about it, you can do better at it. And it's also true that interdisciplinarity and impact are often interwoven. This is just one example from a study I did with a colleague of how mathematicians generate impacts from research and practice and policy and economy and so on. And we looked at several different things, but one thing that was really clear was that heads of departments of mathematics said, yes, the mechanism of interdisciplinarity arises very often when there are impacts that come out of our people's research. And that active collaboration with other disciplines has been a useful pathway towards impact. And that's just one example of how interwoven these things can be. So first I'm going to talk just a little bit about interdisciplinarity, and then just a little bit about knowledge exchange, and then bring them back together. So interdisciplinarity, emphasis on creating more than the sum of the parts through interaction. What are the motivations? Well, you folks are here. You've all got your own motivations. It's great hearing your different backgrounds. But for a lot of people, it's the intellectual excitement. For some, it's practical because there's more funding for more and more these days for complex problems. In the UK, it's called the Impact Agenda, encouraging researchers to work in ways that will make a change happen in the real world. And for some, even within the world of academia, of course, there's evolution of new fields that often come when they're at the juxtaposition of two former fields. There's some interesting interfaces there that can lead to all sorts of new fields, even whole disciplines. But there are challenges. It really does go against academia's default structures, against the reward processes, the promotion processes, and also it takes different kind of management for interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary teams than for managing one's own lab group in one's own particular subdiscipline. But I think universities are beginning to move in their default structure a little bit. So we often talk about silos, the grain storage silos that farmers use, for instance, and typically universities are one silo, one discipline, one silo, and there's one for mathematics over there, and one for art history over there, and one for engineering over there. But I think that more and more universities are beginning to move towards this idea of silos, the silos of different disciplines coming together and interacting a little bit. We hope so. A little background on knowledge exchange. At least in the US, we used to talk a lot about tech transfer. And that was the idea of smart people at universities beneficently handing out technology to the waiting masses who would be very grateful. And then there's a little bit of change, and people said, well, it's not just technology, there's different kinds of knowledge, but it was still the idea of transferring out from the university. And then people said, well, you know, actually, people outside of universities, they have knowledge too. They know things. It's more a question of two-way exchange. And so knowledge exchange is much more often used now. And indeed, as you've already heard from some people, this idea of co-production, bringing stakeholders, people with other perspectives in on teams early on, designing research questions, helping to frame some of the research that goes on, and being a continual sounding board and sharing their knowledge. Different motivations. A lot of people just want to connect to the real world. A lot of funders want that to happen, but a lot of human beings like to do that. They value those different perspectives that they get, and they want to generate impacts. But it's always challenging to work with people who think differently from the way you do, and that means new ways of working. This is from a talk a colleague and I gave in China, impact workshop, but there are different challenges for knowledge exchange, that stakeholders might want something in a different form. They might want a one-page summary of something and you want to write a whole article about. Stakeholders might not have a lot of time to take the findings of research and embed them in their work. They might have different objectives and timescales from academics, for example. And sometimes it's hard to know just which stakeholders to involve, and sometimes they move to different jobs, so it can be challenging. But the good news is that we have learned a lot about the how of these processes. And I'm going to talk really about the processes that underlie both interdisciplinarity and knowledge exchange, because I think there's some fundamental similarities there. These are cartoons from our book about people thinking, oh, I didn't realize there were going to be people talking different languages here. But moving, we know a lot more about how to move to a situation of harmony, where people maintain their different voices, but they come together in a harmonious way. And I'm going to talk about these 4 key attributes for transdisciplinarity that I'd commend to you. One is effort, energy, and time. Another is the critical importance of building relationships. Another is the fact that it takes deliberate management of teams and being aware of certain key roles. And then I'll try to encourage you to think about the importance of critical reflection, stepping back and looking at the process you're involved in and helping it to evolve over time. So effort, energy, and time. I have not conducted a single evaluation. I always ask people, what are your lessons learned? And they always say, it takes more time to do things this way. It's hard work. It can be worth it, but it's just everybody going in should realize it will take extra effort and time. And this, you see in this cartoon from our book, this one guy is saying, come on, everybody, if we work together, we can all build this raft, we can cross over that crocodile-infested river, and we can get to that wonderful storehouse of innovative, useful knowledge. But one person is looking at insects, one is digging holes in the ground, maybe looking for earthworms, one is looking up at the birds, and it takes extra energy and effort to make that all come together. But it can happen. So this is a team Tom's been developing. This is in Amazonia, in Acre. And this is a case where there are people who are experts in remote sensing, in botanical diversity, biodiversity, and large-scale geoglyphs, archaeological geoglyphs, all coming together. And you can see everybody's working together. They're not all looking in different directions. So it's very satisfying. It takes extra effort, but it's very satisfying when it happens. This is not strict. This is idealized schemata, but it's just to give you a sense of what you probably either know or intuit already, that it takes a long time for impacts to happen. So these are hypothetical stages, but I think it gives you a feeling of development over time. First, you have dialogue as early as possible, networking between academics and stakeholders. And you have some joint knowledge exchange activities, maybe workshops or training or sending human beings back and forth between academia and stakeholders organizations. It's very powerful. And you have some active ongoing collaboration during a project, but ideally even afterwards. You might spin off new projects. And gradually over time, the stakeholders start to think in different ways and utilize some of the new ideas that have come up through this research. And then they might actually use the research. You might see a new piece of legislation or a new piece of policy or a new conservation management practice take hold that actually uses the research. But all this does take time, and impacts often arise after the end of one particular small project. So I'll talk a little bit about looking for indicators that at least impacts are developing. Oops, wrong one, sorry. This is just again to say that it takes effort to make impacts happen. This was in our study of mathematics, not for you to read all the little detail, but you can see that there are lots of different mechanisms, from interdisciplinarity to co-production to joint publication to sending PhD students back and forth to having tailored events or building consortia. There are a lot of different mechanisms that can be used to help bring about impacts. And the key to all of those, just about all of them, is that the soft stuff matters. The human stuff, people-to-people stuff, actually makes a difference. One of my favorite quotes from that study is a very senior stakeholder who said, long-term relationships are important. Just throwing research problems over a wall and then having a researcher throw the answers back, that's just not effective. And a very similar point was made. These are colleagues of mine who wrote a sort of fairly iconic, I guess, text on all this using evidence. They said it's face-to-face interactions that are the most likely to encourage policy and practice use of research. So that human element keeps coming up. So I'll talk a little bit about relationship building across disciplines and with stakeholders. A lot of it is bringing human beings together. It's fine people are talking about new technology ways to help bring people together. First virtually, but I think also you need at some point to get people in a room together. Seed funding, pilot projects, early workshops that get people together, they all help with early relationship building. And communication is critical early at the start. It's critical throughout a project, late in a project at the end when you're figuring out how to disseminate, how to share, and it's important to keep that going even beyond. And it takes time, but you got to do it to learn each other's languages. I mean, I'm learning a little Portuguese, but languages like stakeholder languages and the kinds of questions that people ask and the terms they use, what's important to each other. And that means it does take time, but you really want to build respect, mutual respect and trust. And one thing to watch out for is tokenism. We mentioned social sciences. I know a lot of social scientists who get very cross when natural scientists go all the way through a project and then they say, oh, would some social scientists, make this interesting to the public? That's not what they want to do. They want to do the actual research. They're researchers too. So making sure it's not a tokenistic approach like that. Similarly with stakeholders, not to, as was mentioned, not to go all the way through the research and then say, okay, what lucky stakeholder wants this? It's working with them is much more genuine and much more likely to lead to an impact. So I'm going to talk a little bit about managing a team. Sorry. I think these are the key. This is boiled down from, I can do a 2-day masterclass on this. I'm being very quick before lunch. But I think these are key steps. Selecting collaborators, I think Martin mentioned this, but the importance of the right human being. You want people who are open-minded. They want to learn. They respect other people's approaches to things. Very often, personality is much more important than somebody being the very, very, very top, most famous person in a sub-discipline. Conceptualizing the research problem, that's a key step where you have to bring out of all these disparate approaches and questions, and you have to bring something into a coherent, cogent question that everybody can buy into, that everybody sees as a common goal. There's a lot of management in planning who does what, making sure people play a fair role, that they're pulling their share, and that they're doing it all to the same standard. So if you're an ecologist, you can trust that the mathematician is working to the same high standard to which you hold yourself. And that's a lot of trust building. And then part of it is, all this is people, and then whenever you have people, problems can come up. And so managing a team like this means keeping your antennae out and watching for early issues of friction or lack of understanding or people diverging in their sense of what the goal is, and being prepared to be helpful and troubleshoot early on. And keep that common touchstone of common goals, common understanding. Just keep at that from the beginning and throughout a project and keep building those relationships. This is from a study we did for the Environmental Research Council of quite a few different interdisciplinary programs. And it's just a kind of, oh, I have to do this, sorry. I'm not going to go through all those. It's a kind of way of thinking about how you would manage a transdisciplinary project, thinking about catalysis, the importance of warm-up activities, thinking about at what level you expect integration to take place. Is it within a small project? Is it across a big program? Is it in one person's head? We talked about capacity building. Is that a key goal? Is it going to happen through different rounds of funding, through a constant requirement perhaps throughout different types of funding? Are you specifically looking at early career researchers with new capabilities? Who's going to provide the intellectual leadership? Is it the funders? Is it a director? Is it a director and a co-director? And how is that integration going to be managed? Very often, when I've evaluated complicated programs and I say, what's your most important lesson learned? The principal investigator will say, the best decision I ever made was to hire so-and-so who's so good with people, who's a liaison across disciplines or between academia and stakeholders. So sometimes it won't be the principal investigator that does that, but having that somewhere in the team is also a success factor to think about. So I'm just going to briefly mention about 4 or 5 different types of roles. Collaborators on a team, you want them to be open-minded. You want them to be willing to think that other disciplines have something to offer and to appreciate the fact that other disciplines have different languages and research methods and cultures, and that's okay. It's actually enriching. I made the point about personality. Research managers, it's good if they have experience in interdisciplinary work. They should be interested in a lot of subjects and not just driven to get more papers in their discipline with their name first in a top journal in their discipline. They have to be, there's a level of generosity that's needed, and good interpersonal skills, and being good at engaging stakeholders, going to all these blessed committee meetings that Martin goes to, but it's important. We had some master classes and gave them exercises, say, on a little Post-it, what are the roles that you think a leader of an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary program should play? And I just think I like these different ones. So some of them say a cheerleader, or an enforcer, or a diplomat, or a motivator, or a relationship counselor, and then there's my personal favorite, which is chocolate provider. So there are lots of different roles, all to be played at once by the leader. But it's also true that an entity can play a hugely important role. So a center or a program, it can be very important. And I'm just going to mention, I evaluated this program. I evaluated their seed money program. I evaluated the whole program for impact, and I evaluated, separate evaluation, the whole program for interdisciplinarity. So I know this program very well, and I think very highly of it. The Rural Economy and Land Use Program, it was set up when it was quite new to have interdisciplinary programs. It was mostly environmental science and social sciences. They had multiple funders, 10 years of funding, £26.5 million, 39 different constituent projects. Their seed corn funding mechanism worked very well. It helped get groups together to think through what was their research problem that they could tackle together and to get to trust each other. Any project to get picked had to be interdisciplinary, and it had to show they wanted to work with stakeholders and how they were going to do it. Those were bottom line requirements, and it showed by the end that all those projects lived up to that, to varying degrees, but they were all trying. And it wasn't a hardship in a way, because most of the researchers said that the emphasis on interdisciplinarity actually made it easier for them to work with stakeholders, because of course you're working with people with different perspectives. You're learning those skills of how to relate to and talk with and work with people with different perspectives and show your respect for them. And the overall program was very distinctive. It created a culture of people who understood each other. We're all trying to make interdisciplinarity happen. What happened? Did you have that problem? I had this problem. But they're all having that culture, or where they're all trying to include stakeholders. And the people who were in that program kind of, then when they went out in their separate lives later, they recognized each other. They know there's that kind of an orientation. And also one of the impacts of the overall program, because it had been experimental, was that it left these funders with a new sense of confidence that they could, in fact, responsibly and intelligently fund something that was complicated and interdisciplinary and aimed for knowledge exchange and impact on the real world. So the entity itself played a real role. And of course, I know we have funders in the room, funders play critical roles for transdisciplinarity. At the point when they're framing calls for proposals, do they ask for transdisciplinarity? Do they mean it? Is it genuine? How much do they ask for? When they structure their review processes, when they provide guidance to their reviewers, when they set up review panels, how do they weight, how do they interpret the genuineness of the transdisciplinarity that anybody can write the word, well, it's a long word, but anybody can write the word transdisciplinarity, but how does one proposal stand up against another in terms of actually being likely to deliver that? And funders, once they do give awards, there's that implementation phase where it's best if funders understand that it takes longer to do a lot of this, to do transdisciplinary work. So funders are, and there's a whole, I gave the whole talk at CMPQ, and I've done a webinar on this, but there are a lot of messages for funders because they do play a crucial role in their investments. This is not, again, to have you read all of this, but this is a different evaluation of impacts of environmental projects that I did. And basically, the Venn diagram is there to say, oh, I think I have, do I have the circles? Everybody has roles to play. So the people the stakeholders who might ask for some environmental research in this case, the funding agency that managed the projects, and the researchers all have roles to play, and where the big overlap of their circles, did the circles come out yet? The big overlap of the circles is in clarity of communication, early communication of common goals to make it more likely that stakeholders will frame what they need and will be more likely to take the results and use it, and the researchers will address that, and the funders can help keep things in line. Now this is that last final step that I'm going to encourage you. This is critical reflection, and it may sound kind of fuzzy, but actually it's a very powerful kind of thing. Critical reflection is stepping back and looking at the process you're involved in and seeing if it's going well or where it is or where it isn't. So some things that help with that is to have your own mental framework for what you're trying to do. This happens to be from one paper we wrote. It's not that this is the only, it's an example of a conceptual framework where there are broad benefits to society and where there are primary research producers, although there are other kinds of knowledge. There are primary research users like policymakers and practitioners. And so I'm going to just call your attention to three things on this. The arrows go two different directions because there's knowledge amongst the stakeholders as well as the researchers. There's a lot of heterogeneity all the way around. And those little horizontal Easter eggs sort of above the researchers there, we call knowledge intermediaries. Sometimes it's an organization, a learned society, or a funder, or something like that, or the media. Sometimes it's one person. Maybe one person who's willing to go to all those committee meetings, but somebody who can translate and move back and forth across the boundary between stakeholders and researchers. And another way to think about critical reflection, what time, oh my God. Okay, another way is to think about different types of impacts that you're aiming for. And these are five. The first three are typically used by impact evaluation geeks like me, and the last two I came up with, and more people seem to be finding them useful. So if you think about different types of impacts, it opens up your mind to the processes that you're going through so you can step back and see where you're progressing in regards to different types of goals, impact goals. Instrumental ones are nice solid ones, like, by golly, there was a change in a policy because of what we did. But conceptual is intangible, but if you change the way stakeholders think, that could have a lot of ripple effects. It's very important. There's capacity building. If stakeholders think, you know, actually, it was pretty good working with researchers, I'd do that again. Or researchers think, I actually ask better questions because of that input I got from stakeholders, I do that again. And then something that I look for when I get brought in at the end of a project, when it's too early for a lot of impacts, is whether there's what I call enduring connectivity. And that's if the relationships that have been built and if they're genuine enough, that they're lasting. So that even after a project is funded, people pick up the phone, or they send emails, or they visit back and forth, or they write follow-on proposals together. That's an important impact, and it's a proxy indicator, I think, that other impacts are more likely to happen. So ongoing critical reflection helps a team analyze, think through together the processes they're involved in, the time frames, who's doing what role. early on, if you frame your expectations for your types of impacts and what would indicate that you're proceeding towards them, then you can, upon stepping back, whether it's a team retreat or whatever, you can do mid-course corrections, and you can say, actually, if I've got an indicator here, maybe I can consolidate that and turn it into full impact. You can learn, and you can use team meetings, advisory groups, workshops, critical friends that come in as sounding boards, a lot of different ways to do that, but I'd submit it's very helpful. So we are now on concluding thoughts, how to making 1 + 1 = more than 2. Interdisciplinarity is integration across disciplines, and that can drive synergy. Stakeholder engagement is integration across perspectives, and that makes impact more likely. So transdisciplinarity is interdisciplinarity and stakeholder engagement, and that's when I think you can get impact and you can really get more than the sum of the parts. And just to say that impacts, again, in the outside world are generated through processes, so we can learn about them, we can do better at them, and human interaction. Genuine, two-way dialogue with stakeholders, sharing of questions and needs and goals, interdisciplinary integration, thinking about the key roles that are involved and who's playing what, and building relationships of mutual respect. And so planning transdisciplinarity, I'd say you're absolutely where things need to be. It's critical for today's complex problems. It's composed of creative processes. The same attributes continue to contribute to both interdisciplinarity and stakeholder engagement and impact, and human as well as intellectual interactions are crucial. But in all of this, remember, it's fun. Remember to enjoy the journey. That's it. Thank you.
Just before we go to lunch, we have about 10 minutes for some questions, if anyone wants to ask a question. It was planned to have an open floor for discussions now, before lunch, but we just said maybe it would be better to do it after lunch. So for now, it's the questions for Laura, if you have anyone.
Everybody's hungry for lunch.
Yeah,
yes, there's some on there.
Laura, I was just wondering, from your experience, what are the most important things that do not let transdisciplinarity to hold, to work, where if you had some experience that you saw some things that come over and over again that make the groups not like achieving what they were planning?
I think some of these things that stand in the way are, well, one thing is the whole way universities are structured. So if they don't give enough credit to the people that are working hard to make transdisciplinarity happen, and when it takes more time, it takes effort, they're not necessarily writing as many papers in just their discipline because they're helping a group come together. Sometimes people get just worn down by the burden of fighting the system. So that's one problem. I think another problem is that everybody's busy, and sometimes one person can have a great idea and they can mean well, but if everybody's busy and they don't come to meetings, it can happen that one person just tries to do everything, and then you lose the benefits of the team. So that kind of keeping touch with the team and making sure everybody feels involved and valued is important, as well as humane, because one person can't carry the whole burden. And I think part of it is that management, because we are all most comfortable with the things we are most comfortable with. So we're all most comfortable with our own discipline, our own way of asking questions, our own way of doing things. And so so it's quite easy for little tensions to come up. So unless there's that kind of human management and facilitation and keeping people, we are all trying to do the same thing. Unless you have that, sometimes those little tensions can get bigger and divisive. So I think probably those. There are more. I don't want to depress anybody.
Laura, thank you for a very interesting and comprehensive talk. My question is about the role of the funding agencies. because we have a lot of representatives of different funded agencies here, and federal and state level. And you mentioned they play an important role defining or judging transdisciplinarity. Yes. But the way I see the funding agencies, they are similar to the university in terms they have also silos. Yep. They have subcommittees based on different disciplines. And maybe if you can talk a little bit more about how we can also transform our funding agencies in the way they can foster transdisciplinary science.
I think that's a critical question, because unless funding agencies are genuinely behind transdisciplinary efforts, it's going to be all the harder for researchers to try to go up the hill. So for instance, that program I talked about, the Rural Economy and Land Use Interdisciplinary Program, they had multiple funders, and they were fairly experimental. And when this is public enough, I can say it, when they first got together as an advisory board of multiple funders, their first instinct was, well, we put in 1/6 of the money, so 1/6 of the money should go to people in our discipline. And it was like, because they were thinking in their silos, that's their money, it should go to our constituency. And so the director and some other advisors had to really work and say, no, remember, we're all looking for that synergy. What we want are projects where it's not clearly easily one discipline or another, but it's a combination. And so after a few years, after 2 or 3 years anyway, I think the funders then began to think differently. So sometimes it's actual experience and having a common cause that it's just like with a transdisciplinary research project. If you get practice working together, then you're more comfortable working together. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is really thinking through the review process. Because if automatically a funder says, well, I want to be sure this is very good in my field, I will send it to the most typical reviewers in my discipline, the discipline I tend to fund, those reviewers can kill a very good transdisciplinary proposal because they say, well, it's not exactly normal work in this discipline. It's not the cutting edge in this discipline. And so I've heard a lot of people talking about what reviewers and maybe senior review panels for funders need to think about is, where is the cutting edge value? It may not be the leading edge of one discipline and another discipline and another, but what it might be leading is in that synthesis. And so sometimes it takes funders really thinking through what they're asking their reviewers to do. And I think that we all know that's a critical step, that review process. So getting used to working together. A lot of my evaluations in the UK that were of interdisciplinary things, we used to end up with some lessons learned like, it would be very nice if the funders could get together the way we're encouraging the researchers to. And I think it's kind of at each level, building respect, mutual respect and trust includes across funders, and being willing to look in a fresh way at the review process.
Hi, Laura. Thanks a lot for the great talk. And it's on the same lines that the Mercedes just talk on the just following up a little bit on that. So in the strategic process of having champion transdisciplinary projects being funded, do you think that let's say a double way selection process for proposals could be useful on that concern? So we've been experiencing this in some international forums like Belmont or AI or things like that, that you have an opportunity to have a multiple disciplinary panel looking throughout the proposals. So you see if the engagements is really something that it's on the start of the process, and this being evaluated for a midterm evaluation panel for the approval of the proposal. Being very pragmatic in terms of, if we want a champion proposal at the end, and that's for the funding agencies. If we want a champion proposal, so do we need to take more time in terms of evaluating this process, to have exactly that at the end? And so how your experience actually tells us?
That's an interesting question. One project I did was with a big UK but internationally oriented program of many projects called Ecosystem Services for Poverty Alleviation, ESPA. So they had projects with partners all around the world, you may know it. And we looked specifically at their internal review processes because they had constituent projects that were chosen each year, and they varied their review process. And so what we found was that it seemed to work best because these were transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and trying to make an impact in the world. It seemed to work best when there was real guidance given to the reviewers. So if you have, you can have two waves, but I think even if you have a wave where it's just the specific disciplines, you know, you evaluate your discipline in this, I even think then it's important to inform the reviewers that they need to realize that what they're looking at is part of a bigger picture. Yeah, so maybe I didn't quite get the question.
Just one point. Do you think like seed money for small grants to build up bigger grants?
Yeah.
So it's not something that we use in Brazil in terms of funding agencies. So if you have a seed grant for a small grant, in terms of the Síntese Center, so you know, in the process of funding, so you have building up consortium or building up teams with the small grants, and then I was part of ESPA as well, so I think that was an interesting process.
It was. But I'm a huge believer in seed money. I think in getting human beings together and getting them practice in, and sometimes that means kicking out a couple of people. Sometimes it means realizing they need somebody else. I think seed money is hugely important. It really gets people to trust each other, to come up to the kernel of the idea that they could tackle together. And actually, I'm sorry, because I was thinking you were still on reviewers. Actually, if reviewers get used to the idea of selecting seed money, when it's not such scary big amounts of money, they might become more used to being reviewers for larger projects. So I think you're right. It could be a learning experience for reviewers as well as for the researchers. But I'm a big believer in seed money.
So maybe we'll finish this session now and go for lunch. And Laura will be with us tomorrow running the working group on transdisciplinary, so have the chance to go deeper in the subject. Thank you.